So tonight we're going to talk about why Hashem made a world. But I want to start with a brief introduction to what it means to ask why. Why questions have a certain tendency to become unbalanced in certain ways, and I want to try to put that behind us so that it doesn't distract us when we get to the particular question at hand. Some people, often young kids, get into the habit of asking why, and because adults humor them, they pick up the idea that, well, if I ask why and I get an answer, that doesn't have to be the end. Because if I ask why A and get an answer B, I could always ask why B. And when you get B because of C, you could ask why C, and it doesn't have to stop. So they become very persistent and very annoying. Where every answer you get, they want to ask why again. Now, in the abstract, you can show that this attitude towards why, namely the commitment, when I get an answer to a why question, then I ask why about the answer, that attitude is self-defeating, because there are only two ways in which such a process can play out. One is to go on forever, because of the commitment always to re-ask the question, which means that you never get an answer that is the answer to the question, because it always leads to another question. And the other possibility is to go around in a circle. Why A? Because B. Why B? Because C. Why C? Because A. Why A? I told you already, because B. But then that doesn't seem to be satisfactory, that a thing could both be the reason and the outcome. So neither of them is satisfactory. It means that if a person is going to ask why meaningfully, he has to, in principle, be prepared to stop somewhere. He can't have it as a principle that I always get to re-ask the question. That doesn't mean every stopping place is equally appropriate. It doesn't mean he can't object if you want to stop at a certain point and say, I have reason why this isn't an appropriate stopping point. That's fine. But that means that now when a person asks why, he has to pay a price. Explain to me why you think there's a question here. Explain to me what your purpose is in asking why. And if he can't pay that price, then his question may very well be illegitimate. In particular, if you're asking him for motivation, if you're asking why people do things, and let's say for the moment we're talking about human beings, why are you going after A? Because I want B, and A will enable me to get B. And why do you want B? Because I want C, and B will get me C, and so on and so on. A human being can only hold a finite amount of motivation, especially if you think that the mind of the person is the brain, and the brain is a finite resource. At a certain point, you just run out of space. You can't go on forever. A because B, B because C, Y, W because Y, Y because X, X because Z, and Z because double A, and double A because double B, etc., etc. Because you're going to run out of space. There has to be a point at which the answer to the next why question is just because that's the way it is. It's just that's the way it is. That has to be available. If you rule that out in principle, then you've given up asking why as a serious project. Moreover, I think when you look at human motivation, there are natural places for stopping. Now, I'm going to give you some examples. I'm not claiming that where I stop, everyone always must stop. I'm claiming that for some people, under certain circumstances, it's appropriate to stop there, which would mean that the further question why isn't appropriate for them under those circumstances. I'm trying to show that there are some natural stopping places. So, George is working as an architect. And you say to him, George, why are you working as an architect? He said, because I want to get money. Why do you want money? Because I want to buy a house. Why do you want to buy the house? To live in it. Why do you want to live in a house? Because I'm going to enjoy it. Why do you want to do what you'll enjoy? That's a stupid question. Are you for real? Why do I want to do what I will enjoy? Are you human? Because I'll enjoy it. Period. Now again, I'm not saying everybody always must stop there. I always encounter these people. But he did it for reputation. He did it for... People have various types of motivation, but it's appropriate to stop there. Someone said that, you would understand him, you would understand it making sense, you wouldn't have any complaint. Let's trace it out. Let's trace it out from the beginning. Why are you working as an architect? There are millions of architects, and they have lots and lots of reasons, different reasons for working as architects. We know that. So I asked George why he's working as an architect. The answer isn't obvious because many, many people are working as architects for many different reasons. I'm asking what his reason is. He says he wants money. That's one of the reasons why people... Why go after money? Again, money is something that people go after for many, many different reasons. I want to buy a house. People buy houses for different. Some people buy houses for investments. Some people are buying houses for raw materials. Some people buy houses to live in them. So here, if someone said, I want to stop with buying a house, I would say, I'm re-asking the question why, because I know that for many, many different people, there are many different answers, and therefore it's legitimate for me to ask, what's his answer? Now he says, I want to live there. He said, why do you want to live there? Because I'll enjoy it. Well, at this point, if I ask him, why do you want to do what you enjoy? I'm going to get hit with a different circumstance. Yes, there are different reasons why people do things that they enjoy. For example, lower your blood pressure. But one type of person who does things that he enjoys is that he enjoys doing them, and that's the end of the story. There isn't another reason for which he's doing what he enjoys. Not for the sake of some other purpose or some other goal. So when I ask, why are you doing what you enjoy? At this point, it's not clear that I have a legitimate question. And when he says, for me, that question doesn't exist. I'm doing what I enjoy because that's what I do. There's no complaint against that. But it must be that there must be something else you're going after. Why? Mapito. That's a natural stopping point for motivation. And lest I be misunderstood, pleasure is not the only natural stopping point for motivation. Someone sees me handing George $500. He thinks, boy, maybe he's giving out $500, maybe I can get some. And as he asks me, why did you give George $500? I'll tell you why. Because I borrowed $500 from George and I was paying it back. And why are you paying back George the $500 that you borrowed? Now there could be other answers. I know someone who borrowed money and paid it back so as to establish his credit so that in the future when he'll need money, people will trust him. He didn't need the money now. He borrowed it, he paid it back to establish his credit. So that's a possible answer. But suppose I say, you want to know why I paid back the money I borrowed? It's because I borrowed it. When I borrow money, I pay it back. That's what I do. I'm not going after reputation. I'm not trying to sleep better. I'm not, just when I borrow money, I pay it back because that's the way my world runs. That's what I do. Morality can be also a final step on the motivational chain. Can be, not must be, but can be. It can appropriately be the end of the motivational chain. I do it because it's right. There's a third possibility. You ask people why they do something, and sometimes you get an answer like this. I think of myself doing this rather than doing something else. And doing this expresses who I want to be. I have a vision for myself. And when I do this, I'm living up to that vision. That vision draws me. That vision inspires me. I want to live up to it. I think it's important to live up to be like that. Sometimes this happens because you meet someone. I know someone who went through life pretty ordinarily. Then he met someone who was so spectacularly noble. He told me he couldn't dream of a person being like that. Human beings can be like that? Then he thought to himself, well, I want to be like that. And you ask him why he does various things, sometimes he'll say, because that's the way I want to be. That's what I want to grow into. And why do you want to grow into that? Because I do. I saw it, and it seemed to me that this was the best way to be. So I want to go into that. I want to be as best as I can. That's another place where motivation stops. Motivation doesn't always continue on to another end, to another external end. So, if I'm going to answer the question, why did God create the universe, and I'm going to give an answer, I'm trying now to at least push off, but why did he want that? And then why did he want that? And then why did he want that? Which the 9-year-old game that's played. There's no guarantee that you can always re-ask the question why. If there's some weakness in the answer, as I said, many people do these things for many different reasons, and all of them do, like people who pile up money, if they're normal, they don't pile up money in order to have more money. That's sick. Money is a way of getting things that are good. If the money suddenly became devalued, it wouldn't be any good at all. Just with rectangular pieces of green paper? Okay, I'm prejudiced. American money. Okay. Are we together so far? Just a little background on why. Now, the official answer in our literature as to why God created the universe is to express loving kindness. To express loving kindness. Generosity. Beneficence, which means to benefit. You can't express loving kindness without there being recipients, someone to receive the loving kindness that you are providing. At most, you can be potentially loving kind, but you can't actually express loving kindness unless there are those to whom you give, to whom you benefit. So God created a world so as to express loving kindness. Now, you may say, well, how do you know that? How do you know that that's the reason? Maybe the reason is something else. So first of all, there are verses. Olam chesed yiboneh. The world is created out of loving kindness. King David. That's a direct statement. So there are verses that support the idea, and there is a bit of theology which supports the idea. When you talk about the reasons for which people do things, you can divide them into self-serving reasons. I did it because I wanted to cause a certain effect on myself. I wanted it for myself, for what it'll do for me. Versus reasons that are not self-serving or self-regarding in that way. They subdivide into various other things, but you can divide them into self-regarding reasons and non-self-regarding reasons. The goal of the action is to have an effect on yourself, or the goal of the action is not to have an effect on yourself. Now, if a being is regarded as perfect, then no effect on itself can benefit it or improve it in any way. A thing that's perfect can't be any better than it is. That's the definition of perfection. So you're imagining a perfect being that's going to act. It can't be that it is acting in order to have an effect on itself, because in no way could an effect on itself improve it, couldn't make its situation better in any way. And therefore, the motivation has to be a motivation of having an effect on an other. In order to have an effect on an other, that's to be an other. We are talking now about the purpose for which the world is being created. The world is being created because God wants to express loving kindness. Expressing loving kindness precisely to have an effect on the other. Loving kindness is giving to. And for that, there has to be an other. And that's the short answer of the question. Are we together so far? Okay, now, people will ask, what about all the other qualities that we associate with God, which aren't loving kindness? Like justice. So on the one hand, justice is for others. You cannot practice justice in splendid isolation. I know people talk about being just or unjust to yourself, but that's poetry. You haven't got any obligations to yourself. But to create a world in order to express justice places justice in a how shall I say, in an inappropriate position. Justice is a way of regulating interactions that are taking place for some other reason. It's sort of like this. You know, we play a game by rules, play chess by certain rules. You say, why is there a game of chess? Somebody says, so there'll be rules. Rules how to move pieces on a board. That's why there's the game of chess. That's nuts. If you're going to play a game, you need rules. You play the game to test your skill, to show your intelligence, to make a reputation. You play the game for certain purposes. But for there to be a game to play, there have to be rules. But you don't make the game so there'll be rules. The rules are there because that's what gives you an activity that serves some other purpose. So for example, let's take monetary justice. Imagine you live on an island, and on this island, nature provides more than enough of everything. More than enough food, and more than enough clothing, and more than enough shelter. It's just provided by nature more. So will you need property law? Theft and misrepresentation and all the rest? Nobody's stealing anything from anybody. Nobody's selling anything from anybody. Nobody's buying anything from anybody. It's lying around. Just pick it up and use it. Justice is something that regulates an already ongoing activity for the sake of some purpose. So you don't create a world so there'll be justice. Justice comes after the existence of the world and the existence of the activity. It's a way of regulating the activity so as to make it serve its purposes. So now the question will be, all right, so then obviously justice isn't a competitor. Say, well, they created it for loving kindness. Why don't they say they created it for justice? But why is there justice altogether? Loving kindness is a purpose you have explained why it is appropriate for a. By the way, I want to point out to you that I talked about God as being perfect. Strictly speaking, as far as I know, there isn't in the Hebrew language any word that means perfect. The word that's used in Hebrew is shlemus, which means completeness. Shalem means complete. The opposite of shlemus is chisaron, is lacking something. Sometimes a paraphrase of shalem is having no chesaronos, having no lacks. So, in this case, there's nothing missing. Now, of course, by nothing missing, we mean nothing of value, nothing worthwhile, nothing ideal. But the emphasis is on all the ingredients are there. So if all the ingredients are there, then as I told you, self-serving activity is not going to be relevant because nothing that he would do to have an effect on himself could benefit him in any way. He's already complete with all the qualities that are beneficial and that are valuable, I should say. So the question will be why justice is one of his qualities at all. And the answer will be that given that loving kindness creates the world, and it creates it in order that he should express this giving to the other, the circumstances in which they find themselves interact with one another, if they are organized under justice, will best serve his purpose of giving to them, benefiting them, making their lives good. Justice comes in as a means whereby the benefit can be achieved. And this I've spoken to you about a number of times. You want to ask a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, Hashem needing to create a world to express loving kindness to, because as I mentioned before, that he just had the potential for loving kindness, but he needed those to express loving kindness too. Would that not seem to present a lack of shleimus in Hashem almost?
Okay, so this is a standard question that is asked, since the existence of other things serve the purpose of his being able, to express loving kindness. It sounds like he needs them. And is it appropriate to speak of something which intuitively is perfection, but we call it shleimus, is not lacking anything, that it should need something? There are two answers to this question. First of all, I think the worry about need goes like this. One of the qualities of shleimus, of perfection, is being self-sufficient. Self-sufficient, you have for yourself everything that you need to be, and I don't know what you need to be. You have everything that is necessary to contribute to the completeness that you are. Now, let's see whether saying this being needs X challenges completeness and perfection. I'll give you an example. Let's reduce it to human terms. I say, George needs Q. I say, really? Poor George. He's missing Q. I said, but listen, I didn't tell you. George can create Q all by himself, by a mere act of will, using no pre-existing materials. George can just wink Q into existence, which he does. Now, is George dependent upon anything? Is he less than all-powerful? Is he less perfect? He may need Q, but he can provide Q for himself, by himself. That I don't think George has been weakened by the fact that he needs Q. He's not dependent upon anything else. I think the key challenge in the Ayurveda need is that you're dependent upon something outside of yourself. That definitely would contradict shleimus and perfection. That's one thing. The other thing is that when we attribute shleimus, perfection, some want to carve off the actual existence of God from his will, and say that as far as what's beyond the will is concerned, we can't describe it at all, not even with the word shleimus. And what we're describing is the will, the shleimus of the will. And now the answer comes out like this. Let's say that I challenge someone to do a game of chess. In the middle of the game, I take my knight and I move it 3 spaces straight forward, and I take off his queen. And he says, you can't do that. I said, I can't. Watch, I'll do it again. Here, watch. 1, 2, 3, off with your queen. No, but we're playing chess. And in chess, you can't do that. Oh, so what does the word can't mean here? It means, given your decision to play chess, as a result of your decision to play chess, you committed yourself not to move the knight in that way. But then, the need here is a need of a decision that I made to act in a certain way. Not that I need it, it is I made the decision. The decision requires this as a consequence. I think that also isn't a challenge, because my perfection is behind that, is above that. This is downstream from the decision that I made, and therefore it doesn't mean that I'm dependent. So I think that's another way to answer it. So I think that the challenge from needs for a perfect being can be answered in straightforward, logical terms. In the back.
Q, why does George need Q in the first place? It's like, okay, fine, he can make Q whenever he wants and however he wants, but isn't there, like, how can you ignore the fact that, like, for some reason, there's a need in him, and that need is Q?
I'm not ignoring it. I'm just pointing out that under these conditions, having that need doesn't make him any less powerful, any less self-sufficient, any less complete, because the thing that he needs, he makes for himself by himself.
No, but the fact is that the need is there, though. The need exists.
Right, but I'm saying, I will say it once more, and I will have to give up the communication. I said, the challenge in having a need, the challenge in having a need for perfection is that it implies that the perfect being is dependent on something outside of itself. I think that's the challenge. I don't think anything else about it is a challenge. I don't think it's a problem. I'm telling you, my example of George and Q is, here's George needs Q, but his needing Q doesn't make him dependent on anything outside of himself. And therefore it is consistent with his perfection that he should have this need. I don't see that there's a rule that perfect things can't have needs. I see there's a rule perfect things can't be dependent on things outside of themselves. And that's what I'm protecting. That's the best I can do. Yeah.
What's the distinction between perfection and completeness? Because you're mentioning there is no Hebrew word for perfection, but I'm confused how we would see a difference.
Yeah, it could be like the difference between a triangle and a trilateral. There are cases where you have two different descriptions. I mean, think about it, right? A triangle has three sides, right? Now, take a trilateral closed plane figure, three sides, so 1, 2, 3. There are three angles, right? So if it's a trilateral, it's got to be a triangle. So the triangle's got to be trilateral. But trilateral says three sides. Triangular says three angles. A side is not an angle, and an angle is not a side. They're two different things. Just so happens when you talk about three of them, turns out that it's always the same figure, right? So I think that this concept of completeness will imply our concept of perfection. But the word perfection means that than which there can be no better. Complete means not missing anything. There's different words and different concepts. It may be, when you work out the logic, a thing that's not missing anything will also be something than which there can be no better. And also, something than which there can be no better won't be missing anything. But the words don't say that, so there are two different concepts that apply to exactly the same entity. It's a little piece of the way logic works in philosophy. Okay, so now the purpose of then is giving. Now, what kind of giving is that? And here, the second chapter in the Way of God by the Sato is absolute gold. I'm going to take you through part of it, partly because I mentioned it the other night, and somebody asked me about why God can't do things that are impossible. I show you how it works with respect to the creation of the universe. So God's purpose is loving kindness. That means to give, to benefit, to provide for. In Hebrew, lehitiv. What is he going to give? He's going to give good. That means they're going to be creatures, and he's going to give them good. How much good? Which good? Well, since God is perfection, he's not going to be satisfied with a halfway good, or sometimes good. He's going to give them the greatest, careful now, the greatest possible good. Greatest possible good. Well, what's that? Where is that found, the greatest possible good? Well, he, being perfection, is the greatest good. Did I just leave out the word possible? Yes, I did. He is the greatest good. So, according to this plan, what he ought to be doing is creating creatures and giving them the good that he is, since he is the greatest good. And being perfect is going to do the best job. He left out possible again. Why did you do that? You're going to do the best job. So then he should be giving to these creatures his own very good. That's not possible. Why is that not possible? Well, one of the goods that he possesses, one of the definitions of his perfection, which we just now said 6 times, is to be self-sufficient. self-determined, independent of anything else. The project now is to make creatures, to make them. God is going to make them. He's going to give them a good. Could he give them the good of being totally self-sufficient while he's making them? Presumably not, because if he's making them, they're leaning on him. They need him to make them. Otherwise they won't be. He's creator, that's part of his perfection. They are creatures, created. They can't be the creator. They can't be self-created. He's not self-created either, but for a different reason. They're created by something outside of them, upon which they depend for their very existence. So certainly they are not self-sufficient. Now the word possible comes marching back in. So he's going to give them the greatest good that is possible for a creature to have. Given that being a creature means some aspects of good you're going to miss out on, because they're incompatible with being a creature. We're going to give them the greatest good that a creature can have. And that's exactly what he says. Exactly what the Lutzato says. Even though in certain translations they don't get it right. But that's what he says. Yeah.
Could he not technically, being a perfect being which is omnipotent?
Which is what? Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Omnipotent, right?
All
powerful.
powerful, yeah.
Right. Could he not technically defy rules of logic as we see them and create a perfect being other than himself, which is not dependent on himself?
Okay, I will answer this briefly. I've done this for some of the people in this room a number of times, but I'll answer it briefly. The Jewish tradition is unanimous that we do not describe God as doing impossible things. Where impossible means logically impossible. The Rambam has a whole chapter on this in the guide, and Malbim has it in a description of the Jordan stopping. Others, there's, as far as I know, unanimous. Have I studied every book? No, I have not studied every book. The latest Otzar HaChochma has over 70,000 volumes. But as far as I've explored it, no one says that he can, that we describe him as doing things like that. They have an answer. They have a reason for it, which I don't understand. It's some kind of philosophical reason, which I'm not been able to understand. I've asked many people. I've not been able to penetrate it. But I have a modern explanation. Let's take the example of making a square circle. Okay? So let's suppose someone asks, can God make a square circle? Cannot. He says, if you believe God is omnipotent, as you said, you have to agree that he can make square circles. I square circles are a contradiction. So what? He's not bound by our laws of logic. Nothing binds him, and so forth and so on. Right? I think that talk has no application. I think the reason is this: when you talk about square circles, the problem is not that square circles set up a very, very difficult barrier, a very difficult challenge. How much energy do you need to have the infinity of energy? Uncountable infinity of energy? I mean, how far do you have to go to overcome square circles? That's not the problem. The problem is that the phrase square circles doesn't say anything at all. It has no meaning. So when someone asks me, can God make square circles? My response is, what? What are you talking about? Maybe you should try it again, because square circles doesn't speak to me. I'll give you an example. You're on your way to the mall. Friend calls up. You going to the mall? Yes. Could you do me a favor? I suppose. Pick me up a square circle. What would you do? I think you'd say, what? What do you want? If you could tell me in other words, maybe I could help you. But if all you're going to tell me is pick up a square circle, I don't know where to start. I know what you're talking about. You say square circle, nothing lights up in here, under my cranium. Nothing goes on over here. The problem is not that God hasn't got the power to do it. The problem is there's no it. because you failed to make sense in your description of what you want him to do. So it's not a question of his not lacking the power. There's no power in question, because there's nothing to do in question. It's just mumbo. It's just mumbo jumbo. It would be like somebody says, "Do you think that God can blah?" You got to say yes. You're frum, right? Look, you're wearing that hat. You got to be frum, and you got to say yes. Yeah, God has no limitations, so He's got to blah. No, I don't have to say that, because blah is not meaningful. You haven't said anything. There's nothing to say yes or no to. By the way, not only wouldn't I say that God can make square circles, I wouldn't say that He can't make square circles. I wouldn't say either of them. Because when you put a blah at the end of the sentence, there's nothing there to say yes or no about. It's just empty. That's why we don't tolerate, well, I'm giving a modern explanation. That's why we will not tolerate saying, well, we can't do it, it's too hard for us, nothing's too hard for God, so He could do it also, and He could make square circles. We're not going to tolerate that. Because when you say He could make, and then you go on and say square circles, that's like a dog barking. You know? He could make woof woof. And then woof woof doesn't contribute to the sentence. Okay, that's why we're not going to tolerate that. So then it becomes very important to know, we're talking about the good that God wants to bring into existence, what its logical requirements are. Because those logical requirements, even God is going to be bound by on pain of not making sense. When somebody says, just like you said, why can't He do this without that? The answer will be, this without that is square circles. And then you haven't asked the question. It's not a question that you can put on the table.
Unless we can define the thing which He has to be able to do, then it's not a challenge to the way He can do it.
Roughly, that's roughly the idea. That's right. Now, I should say that times when we think something is a contradiction and it turns out not to be. I'm not putting the words in prison. I'm making the principle I'm stating is contradictions don't have meaning. Somebody says to me, "Oh, you thought square circle was a contradiction. Look, it isn't a contradiction. You're making a mistake." I'd be happy with that. So then, isn't a contradiction. And if it isn't a contradiction, then it can make sense, and we could discuss it 100%. But the principle is only when they do contradict, then there's nothing being said. Yeah.
My understanding is correct. Then you seem to say that God doesn't do illogical things. But then would we, for instance, how would you feel about the phrase that God is, let's say, bound by logic? Would that be an issue, that phrase?
God is bound by logic? No, we are bound by logic. And logic binds us to tell us when we are making sense and when we're not making sense. It's we who are talking who are bound by logic. If we don't follow the laws of logic, we have failed to make sense in what we say. It's our failure, not His failure. Yeah, He's not bound by any real rules. But when you break the laws of logic, you don't have a real rule. You're not talking about a real rule. Yeah.
Before when you touched upon a little bit, you said that God didn't create Himself either. So you were saying what do you mean? And do you mean like He was just never created, He just always was? Is that what you're saying?
The second part is basically right. Nothing can create itself because in order to act at all, it has to exist already, does it not? I think you can't act without existing, and creating is an act. So to create Himself would mean to exist before He exists, and that's worse than square circles. So the source of His existence is that His existence is necessary. It's not accidental at all, and necessary facts don't tolerate further questions why either. I was going to say this before, but since it came up, you often hear the following kind of question come up. You people are all in favor of God because it gives you a way to explain where things came from. Where does this come from? Where did that come from? It came from this. Where did that come from? And then you trace it all back to God. So I'm going to ask you, where does God come from? He thinks that that's parallel, and it's a fair question. But it isn't a fair question. And the reason is because when I ask where X came from, that's because I'm assuming X came. And I want to know, where did it come from? But that's an assumption that it came. It wasn't there, then it was there. It wasn't here, it was someplace else, and now it came, and now it's here. So there's a coming that's given, and I want to know the source for that coming. But in God's case, there's no coming. No time when God wasn't and he came into existence. They ask how he came into existence. When there's no alternative, then the question why disappears. God's existence is necessary. There's not even the possibility of God not existing. At that point, there's no question why left over. And I'll give you an example of this. There are no 1 foot long mosquitoes. You say, Baruch Hashem, what would I do with a 1 foot long mosquito? Don't worry! Why? Because insects breathe through their skin. And therefore, the ratio between the volume and the surface area of the skin is very, very important. And something gets big. When things get bigger, the volume increases as the cube of the diameter, and the area increases as the square of the diameter. So the ratio of surface area to volume goes down and down and down. At a certain point, there's be so little surface area to absorb the oxygen in to feed the needs of the volume that it can't exist anymore. And a foot is much too long. So therefore there are no, if somebody asks why is that, he needs to go have a tea. Right? I just gave an explanation as to why it's impossible. It's impossible that it be so. That's the end of the story. No other way it could be. In other words, often when you ask why is something the way it is, the implicit question is, why is it this way rather than some other way? Once you find out there's no other way, then the question why it is the way it is drops out. Certainly it's not a pressing question. So that's why there's not a problem in terms of his existence. Okay, so now he wants to give the greatest possible good. So now it means possible for a creature to have. You can't just copy and paste his goodness onto the creature because it won't fit. Because part of that goodness is being totally self-sufficient, self-defined, and the creature can't be that. He's a creature being created by God. So, says Ramchal, he gives the creature as much of his goodness as he can possibly have as a creature. So let's see. God is totally self-sufficient, self-contained, self-defined. Now let's take, on the other end of the spectrum, a tree. God creates the tree. Everything about the tree is what God does to it. It's totally other-defined, other-managed, other-created. In the respect of being self-defined, a tree is at one end of the spectrum and God at the other end of the spectrum. Each at the end of the spectrum, God is totally self-defined and the tree is zero self-definition. Nothing about the tree is what it is because of itself. It's all because of what God does to it. And the same is true for squirrels. And the same is true for porpoises and chimpanzees and crows, which are smarter than chimpanzees, and even angels. Indeed, you might think, how is it possible that it shouldn't be so? Everything other than God is God's creature. He's making it, giving it its existence. How would it be possible for a creature whose existence is being given by God continuously, for that creature to have some feature about itself which isn't caused by God? Isn't that already a contradiction? And the answer is no, and you all know the answer to this question. There is one feature that God put into the world which enables a creature to be somewhat self-determined. What feature is that?
Free will.
How about free will? Free will means that at least sometimes I make decisions that aren't caused by God. What God does in creating me is he creates a potential for self-determination. Free will is a potential for self-determination. Free will, according to the Ramchal, plays an absolutely fundamental role. I haven't seen this literally in others, where I become godlike by becoming partly self-determined. He says this word for word. Ba'al atovahu. That a person should have something he has, and he should be the owner of it. He should be the one who has possession of it because he made it for himself. That's what free will does. And that way, free will makes us something like God. His free will is necessary, Mine is contingent. He gave it to me. I could lose it. When I die, it's gone. His free will is absolute. Mine is relative. His free will blankets the entire, his self-determinedness. His self-determinedness covers the whole of his existence. My self-determinedness covers only a portion of my existence, but it is a sharing of self-determinedness. That sharing is the first step in giving to the creature the good that the creature can have. That's step one. And then all the other features of sharing, all the other features of having similar qualities is based on that. Because the other features are moral and spiritual qualities. And without free will, nothing has any moral or spiritual qualities at all. I'll give you one illustration, then I'll take your question. Let's say I program my computer with a virtual agent to search the internet for various kinds of interesting information, and every Thursday night, to 500 recipients worldwide, comes out Gottleib's newsletter with all sorts of interesting information. People get up Friday morning, okay, in Australia it's already Sunday, and they open it up, all this interesting information, and one guy in Dubuque, Kansas says, boy, Gottleib's computer is so generous. God's computer is so kind. God's computer sends out all this information free. We didn't even have to pay for it or anything. God's computer is really, really genuinely good. I hope you feel that the praise here is a little misplaced. It isn't the hunk of metal on my desk that deserves these qualities of being good and kind and generous. I deserve them because I'm a person with free will, and I decided to do this. The moral qualities of goodness and kindness and generosity belong to a creature that exercises free will. And a creature that doesn't exercise free will doesn't have any of those features, no moral or spiritual features at all. And that being the case, if we're going to resemble God means having features that are similar to His. Those features are good-making because He is the greatest good. So having features that are related to His means that we are participating in that good. Those are going to be dependent upon free will. So free will has a double effect. Number one, free will by itself makes us like God because we're partly self-determined. And number two, by being partly self-determined, we can create for ourselves those features which are similarities to Him, which create more elements of good in what we are. That's the crucial point that he makes in the second chapter of the Way of God. So this is how we get some of the good that he wants to give us. It's only half the story. Dveikus is the other half. But at any rate, this is the half that I wanted to tell you tonight. Yeah.
Before Adam moved from the Eitzah Das, he wouldn't have a knowledge to Quran. So how would it have a theory at that point?
What did Adam do before he ate from the tree of knowledge and didn't know about good and evil? The Rambam in the second chapter of the Guide, which you should read, I would say 18 or 19 times, says that he possessed the understanding of emes and sheker. Emes and sheker are true, accurate, pure, exact, absolute. Good and evil are pale echoes, misunderstood, prejudicial echoes of emes and sheker, which also provide for free will. But emes and sheker provide for free will in the purest state, and tov and ra provide for free will in a polluted state. And we greatly decreased our ability of free will by lowering our state to tov and ra.
Would that be then, when we say Hashem is emes, that'd be another aspect?
Yeah, when I say emes, we don't mean that he never lies. The word emes, Rav Dessler has a whole essay on emes. Emes does not mean true. I don't care what it says in the dictionary. Dictionaries are full of mistakes. Emes does not mean true. It's a mistake in the dictionaries. Okay, so now let's just run through the logic, and I'll show you how this applies to square circles. So, God's perfection needs to express itself in expressing loving kindness. Somebody says, I don't know, why can't God be perfect and not express loving kindness, only have it potentially? Well, it's a contradiction. Well, yeah, it's a contradiction. Because he would be better if his loving kindness was not just internal, but also be expressed. And then perfection means the best, than which there is nothing better. So that would be a contradiction. If you ask, why doesn't that wait for God? you're not making sense because you're expressing why isn't God a square circle, and that's not a question. Now, in order to express loving kindness, there have to be others. I don't know, why can't God express loving kindness without there being others? Because then it won't be loving kindness. Loving kindness by definition means benefiting others. And what's true by definition is something which, if you try to deny it, you're just contradicting yourself. Like saying, a square with no edges, do me something. Sorry, it has no edges, it's not a square. There's nothing to talk about. So then the question will be, okay, so now he's going to benefit these others. Why not benefit them by giving them godliness? I explained that, because godliness would include being independent of all others, and if he's giving it to them, they're not independent, they're dependent. So that's a contradiction. You're going down the line. Each step is guaranteed by the previous step on pain of contradiction, meaning that if you try to describe having this step without the next step, you end up with a contradiction. And the crucial point, which I can't do in detail now, but I've done about 80% of it, is that as you chase the trail down, you end up with saying, and without evil, it won't work. And this means that there can't be a world without evil. Even God can't make a world without evil. I said this the other day, that if there's an evil which is a necessary means for a greater good, a perfect agent can do that. And the question came up briefly, and I didn't answer it then. Well, but what do you mean necessary? Why can't God get to the good without the evil? And the answer is because the good that he wants to do and this particular evil are related by this chain of steps where if you say there isn't the evil, then there won't be free will. If there won't be free will, then we can't be similar to him. If we can't be similar to him, then we won't have his good. If we won't have his good, we won't have the maximum good. If we won't have the maximum good, then he's not doing the job that he wants to do. All of those steps are backed up by straight definition and logic. So then asking why he doesn't make a world which is to benefit us in the maximum way without making evil, the answer is because that question is really square circles. Yeah.
So what do you say when Moshiach comes and allegedly is supposed to, that all evil is supposed to stop? Say stuff like that.
It depends upon how you understand the Messianic era. If the Messianic era, like the Rambam, has in it free will, and has mitzvos, and has averos, has reward, has punishment, and so forth and so on, then indeed, evil will continue to exist, free will will continue to exist, and reward and punishment will continue to exist, and achievement and failure, all of it will continue to exist, just as it is here. If you think free will goes away, then the Messianic era becomes like the first stage of the world to come. In the world to come, there is for sure no free will. That everybody agrees on. So free will is only a means. Free will is not essential to the definition of a human being. If that weren't so, then in the world to come we wouldn't be human. That's not right. Free will is an artificial condition of human beings to achieve the good that God wants them to have. We're not less human in the world to come. If anything, we're more human. People should think about that. Yeah.
What defines human if not free will?
Gee, I wouldn't have put it on the list at all. And you make it sound as if it's the only thing on the list. Human being is a combination between a soul and a body, and something which is designated to be the recipient of God's ultimate good. And since the stage of free will is only a preliminary, where the goal of creation is not being realized, well, the definition of something often is its ideal state and the goal for which it's created. Right? So, the goal for which we're created is to be in Olam Haba, then that's where the real human being is. If there's no free will, then free will can't be the definition of a human being. Free will in our world is what sets us apart. I said that wrong. It's one of the things that sets us apart from all other things. Squirrels and angels and all the rest, we alone have free will. But that doesn't mean it's our essential definition. It's a quality that sets us apart. But since it's only a means to an end, it can't be the essential definition.
Can I also just ask you to clarify a little more? When you say that God could not create a world without evil because evil is necessary for the good he wants to give. However, is he not creating those rules?
Maybe, but that doesn't make them wrong. or it doesn't even make them limited. He could create a world with other means altogether, but they wouldn't include violating our rules. Our rules just wouldn't be relevant. That's like saying, well, if you're tired of chess, play football. Football doesn't violate the rules of chess. It's just another game. And the rules of chess aren't relevant to that game. But it's not the opposite of the rules of chess either. Football is not a case where you can castle your queen instead of castling your king. It's just another mitzvah altogether.
So why not create a world of good where he gives good that doesn't require evil?
You're using the words that come from the rules of the game that he created for us. We're trying to use the words, the rules, the concepts that he created for our reality. Given those rules and given those words, this is the outcome that you get. Those others aren't describable by our words, if they're anything at all. The words that describe chess don't describe football. So you can't use the vocabulary of chess. There's no king, there's no queen, there's no pawn, there's no bishop, there's no castling, right? That doesn't happen in football. So the question is, why can't you create a game without castling? That's not football. Castling isn't relevant. You can't ask in football, do they castle or don't they castle? Castling isn't there. God could create a world that's utterly different from ours and utterly beyond our words and our concepts, but that wouldn't be a world in which there's good and no evil. Good wouldn't apply, evil wouldn't apply, exist wouldn't apply, all our words wouldn't apply. The project of describing in our words something which isn't describable in our words is a self-defeating project.
Unless it was just a similar game to chess.
I'm sorry, say again?
Unless it was just a similar game to chess.
But then it would obey the rules.
I'm just wondering, is there any, since we're talking about evil, is there any gratuitous evil, or I guess I should say unnecessary evil, based on what you're saying?
Oh, so this becomes really the philosopher's question. And of course, it's a question, how would you know? But yes, if you found an evil which played no role in promoting goodness, then you would have a problem. The problem for the problem is, how in heaven's name would you know that? You'd have to know the total organization of our universe, how everything is connected to everything else, what influences things have on other things. And we're, even in naturalistic terms, we're extremely far from such an idea, let alone the spiritual underpinnings of our world. We certainly don't know that. So coming to that conclusion is really beyond hope. Yeah.
What's the purpose of Olam Haba? I always assumed it was ultimate, the purpose of pleasure. That was the point. And if that's the case, then the Rabbi was saying free will is one of the prerequisites to give over the ultimate good, which I'm assuming we're creating more pleasure there. Then if you remove your free will in Olam Haba, then surely you're just diminishing the good or the pleasure you're going to receive.
Okay, I'll answer this question, but then I have to go. The nice questions. Wait a minute. If free will is necessary to give over the pleasure, so then if you don't have free will, you can't get the pleasure. No, it's not true. I'll give you an example. There is a question of receiving more than you earned. That is considered degrading, and it's according to certain sources, although it has to be understood carefully. Receiving more than you earned, so it's a gift, and you're being treated like an incompetent, being treated like a child, and that's a put down. There's a whole long thing to say about that. Okay, so I'm working as an accountant. People who work in my sphere of accountancy and a number of hours with my training are making, $3,000 a week. And my employer pays me $8,000 a week, so I've got to look at the other $5,000 as a gift. I didn't earn that. I know what you earned for this. I know what my work is worth, and that's just an extra gift. If God put us in the world to come, either straight away without any effort at all, then I'd feel like a 5-year-old. I'm totally incompetent, can't accomplish anything on my own. I just be giving candy, Okay, that's a real put down. If I lived a life of 120 years and I worked reasonably well, and I earned for myself a certain amount of merit, it's conceivable that I could measure the reward in the world to come at a certain point, since especially it's eternal, so it's going to accumulate beyond any finite limit. At a certain point I'm going to say, well, this is much I earned, but from here on out it's a sinecure. It's just, it's a free gift because I didn't earn more than that. You could have that problem. But that's not the way reward works. And the way reward really works doesn't have that problem. Here's the way it works. There are people who go out into the forest and build their own homes. Sometimes they use only their fingers. Sometimes they use, a hammer. At any rate, they build their own home. Let's say it takes them 10 years. the wiring, and the whole thing. Who knows whether they have climate-saving devices and all the rest. Those are the kind of people who usually do that. Okay. Now he lives in this house, in this home. Somebody comes to him 10 years later and says to him, how long did you take working on this house? 15 years. Wow, 15 years. How long have you been living here? 10 years. Well, you really made something for yourself, and I hope you enjoy it. I come back 25 years later, say, hey, how long have you been here now? He says, 40 years. And I say, let's see, you worked on it for 15 years, and now you've been here for 40 years? Don't you feel sort of, you don't deserve it? Don't you feel belittled? You put in 15 and you got 40 years of benefit? That's a lot more than you put in. You feel you're sort of getting something for nothing. You're being treated as incompetent, childlike because you're getting something for nothing. I don't think you feel that way at all. You're living in the home that you built. You wouldn't feel incompetent or fruitless or childlike if you lived in it forever because you built it for yourself. Reward is not in cash. And reward is not in spiritual cash. It doesn't go into a spiritual bank account. Reward is in the way in which you build yourself into a recipient of the good that's flowing in the world to come. You receive what you get of it because of the way you crafted yourself into a recipient. That doesn't have to end up with what's called an Amid Sufa, bed of shame, ever, because you created yourself. And this goes back to what we said, that free will is the thing which makes you self-defined, self-determined. You did this for yourself. It makes you self-creative. Eila toldos Noach. I didn't see the Meforshim comment on this, but you see, these are products of Noach. The next word after that is Noach. Noach produced himself. Not totally. There is a God who's giving him existence, but his character, his spirituality, his principles, his accomplishments, he made them for himself. Eila toldos Noach.